All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Mighty Slim, and we are privileged and honored today to be talking to the one and only, the legendary Dean Torrence, surf rock legend of the best known for his work with Jan and Dean. So, how you doing today, Dean?
Doing good. I call you Mighty or Slim
just
or MS.
don't call me late for dinner or collect. You can call me Slim. Yep.
Okay. Slim, I like it.
So, tell me about
I had a nickname of uh, the Blade, which was just Blade because I was so skinny and I was kind of like a blade of grass.
Well, I've been called many things, but I've never been called a blade. So,
No, well, actually that was a very interesting nickname. Never had one that was as good as that one.
nice. Yeah, I've been called, I've been called everything under the sun. So, my first questions are as a kid, what were some of the, what do you remember about, say, the first records that you heard that sort of knocked you out? You know, sort of becoming conscious of, I guess music in general and the stuff you liked as a youth. And the first record you say, "Wow, yeah, I remember hearing that for the first time," and going, "Wow," you know.
Oh man, that's my parents had always had some sort of music usually going on, but of course they were Frank Sinatra fans and they listened to big band stuff, and I kind of liked it all.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever they were listening to, I was okay with it. Kind of that middle of the road stuff. Um, the first time I kind of started hearing doo-wop, I realized that was music that was targeted to teenagers or even well, I wouldn't say preteens, but mostly to teenagers, probably high school on, that I realized there could be some music just targeted at our age group, which was pretty exciting.
Mm. Did
Then
you?
of course Elvis came along soon thereafter, so then it became official.
Mm, mm. Did you have any favorite doo-wop tunes at the time?
Well, the very first song that I sang in a group, which was a group Jan put together of just high school buddies, and of course the doo-wop was perfectly suited for a vocal group. So we would always have at least 6 or 8 guys that would like to kind of sing these songs, and there were plenty of vocal parts for everybody. So it was like a whole big old team effort, and it was probably social too as well. We got a kick out of practicing the songs and just hanging out with one another. I'm sure that well, I can't speak for, well, Jan probably, he was the alpha dog. So he probably had visions of actually making some real songs that might be recorded, professionally recorded, but the rest of us were just in it for the fun. So I think the first song that we all learned together, because we were going to sing in our high school talent show, was a song called "Get a Job"
Get a Job by the
by
Silhouettes.
the Silhouettes. Very
Yep.
good. So I think that was the very first one. And then I think we learned, of course, Rock and Roll's Here to Stay and a few of those other classics. But Get a Job was the very, very first one, and will always be close to my heart because it was a fun song to sing, and it got us all interested, enough to keep doing it for a while.
Now, was that the group that called yourselves the Barons?
Yeah, because actually most of the guys that were in this vocal group were all in a club, including myself, called the Barons, and it kind of started with a group at school that included some Barons and some other athletes. We were all on the football team, and we would sing these things after practice in either the locker room or the shower room, because the shower room was really old tile and had a great echo.
Mm.
And then once we kind of moved it up to when football season was over, then we kind of moved our group up to Jan's house after school, and he had a tape recorder. I didn't know anybody else, especially a young person. I didn't even know any older people that owned their own tape recorder. And Jan happened to have not only one, he had two of them. So we would go up there and actually record so we could really listen to what we were doing and critique it and go from there. But we would have parties, maybe every other weekend, that included mostly the club that we were in, the Barons. So we obviously thought that would be a good name for our, in quotes, vocal group.
Hmm. Did you, now when you were recording, were you recording cover tunes, or did you have any originals at the time that you were recording? And
in the beginning, no, mostly all cover tunes, because nobody really had that kind of time to write. We were still in school.
Mm-hmm.
And then a bunch of us, of course, Jan had an IQ about 178 or 9 or 180, so he didn't really have to study.
Okay.
Now, the rest of us had to actually study after school, at least some. So if we went to his house right after school, we could only spend a couple of hours, and then it was time to go home and do our homework, or some guys would actually have part-time jobs. So, we didn't really spend a whole lot of time doing this, but just enough to keep ourselves interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until we did think about trying to come up with something that we wrote that would be an original. And we eventually got around to that, and actually made a record.
Now, was that Baby Talk, or was that something before then?
No, that was before Baby Talk. That was Ginny Lee. That did come out as Jan and Arnie.
Now, was that now? Why did it come out as Jan and Arnie? Was that because?
Well, that's what I wanted to know. Well. As it turned out, kind of as this thing progressed, or actually de-evolved, people get busy, and we were getting ready to graduate. We were seniors in high school, and everybody's going to be going different directions. Some were going off to college, some were going to, just go travel the world, and some had to get to work. So it just got to a point where there was only a couple of us that would show up, and Arnie was one of those guys.
Mm-hmm.
And we recorded that Ginny Lee song, kind of the three of us, and I think even a fourth guy was involved for a while. And then I had somehow, some of my Asian buddies talked me into going into the Army Reserve, because there was a program a reserve program that meant you only had to go in for 6 months of active duty, and then you were kind of on, in quotes, standby to be called up. But I kind of thought, well, I didn't know how I felt about that, but my Asian buddies, who were a lot smarter than I was, assured me it was probably a smart idea to get it over with, because we were right out of high school, and why put it off? Where most of my other buddies weren't quite as smart, you put it off. Don't worry about that. Nothing will ever come of it. Until Vietnam came along, and I was already out of the Army by that time, and a bunch of my friends were sweating being drafted. So it was a smart move. But on the other hand, I went off to do the 6 months, and that was, of course, right about the same time that Jan wanted to take our little demo record and make an acetate out of it to take around to record companies. And wouldn't you know it, I was off. I was off in the Army when he got a record deal.
All right,
Cool.
continue what you were saying about being conscripted into the Army, and after being prompted by a couple of Asian friends, and with that, did that get you out of Vietnam?
Yes, it did. It really, really did. So it worked. It couldn't have worked better. And we only had to give up 6 months, and I had a lot of friends that had to put in 2 to 3 years. So 6 months. 6 months when you're 18 years old is not a whole lot of time. So I actually heard the recording, Ginny Lee, when I was in the Army. I had no idea that it had actually come out as a professional recording. I heard it on the radio. Quite a surprise.
Did you say to all your other Army buddies, "Hey, that's me"?
Oh yeah, but they were all making up stories about their exploits. So they just thought, pretty much everybody always thought somebody was bullshitting anyway. So I don't think any of them believed me. Except my Asian buddies, who we all went in together kind of in a buddy system. I mean, they knew about the song and knew all about it. So I had a little bit more credibility because there were other guys who could back me up.
And what happened?
But it wasn't much fun. It wasn't much fun talking about something that I didn't actually participate in.
I thought you did participate in it.
Well, I thought I did, but then I called Jan from a payphone, and he told me that my vocal had been taken off.
Oh, okay, that's very interesting.
Well, and not really. I mean, they just re-recorded it because they actually went into a real recording studio. So they had to kind of start from scratch anyway.
Now, what happened when you got back from the Army? Almost remind me of Elvis in that way. Yep.
Yeah. Well, Elvis was still popular, and I was still I was still on the outside, kind of looking in, and I thought, well, what? I didn't give myself a chance in hell to get back into the group because they already had a career. They had put out 3 singles by this time. They'd been on the Dick Clark show. They had done all sorts of publicity, and as far as anybody was concerned, the record company had a hit group that was making current records. So what would they need a change for? Record companies don't like changes.
Sure.
And there was, so I just figured my timing was pretty, as it was in life. You don't know at the time that actually it worked out. Obviously, it worked out pretty well. But in the moment, I thought I'd blown it. I just couldn't. It was such a weird thing because as a young person, I had never been involved in something that I couldn't get out of.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even school, you could ditch school.
Sure.
I was in the Army. There's
Yeah.
no way you're going to get out of the Army without, some making some big deal, or I wouldn't even know. I didn't know where to start to get out of the Army, and I never even really tried. So I figured I just, it was just bad timing. And luckily for me, within, I guess I'd been back maybe a month or two, and I met up with all my buddies on a Saturday or Sunday to just kind of play some football
Mm-hmm.
at our old high school, just sandlot, just messing around. And I actually didn't expect to see Jan, because I thought Jan was, in my mind, a professional musician now, and he's not going to show up to play some football. And,
Sure.
on a Sunday, he's probably busy. He's hanging around with Anne Margaret or Annette Funicello. And I was very surprised to see that Jan showed up, and just like the old days, and like it was before I left. And after we played and had a good time, he asked me if I wanted to come up to his house and work on some music, and I was like blown away. I couldn't figure out whether I heard that right. I thought maybe he said just come up and listen to some of the stuff they were working on. I couldn't believe it. And I guess I somewhere in there asked, well, what about Arnie? And Jen said, he's no longer interested.
Wow.
I went, well, why? How? Oh, now I'm really confused. Why would somebody not be interested in being on the charts and in all those fan magazines and hobnobbing with Dick Clark and other artists? And it just was a mystery to me. But I thought, I'm not going to ask too many questions and just take it and see what happens.
Hmm.
Obviously, it worked out pretty well.
So when did you folks?
And I ended up seeing Arnie for years. After that, Arnie and I ended up in the same college. Jan went to UCLA, and I went to USC. And Arnie was going to USC, and we'd see each other just about every day in class. We happened to be in the same school of architecture, so I'd see him every day. He didn't care. He was happy. He didn't really like show business, and I don't think he and Jan got along all that well.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't seem to regret it or be jealous of it at all, which made it fun for me, because then we weren't at odds for any sort of reason. He was actually genuinely happy for us. I thought that was pretty cool.
Nice. So when did you? So you're still working with Jan, and when did you folks record? Was Baby Talk the first single you guys recorded? This was, of course, after Jenny
Yeah.
Lee. So that was the first single.
Well, it was a good. They put out 2 more singles after that at least I think they got on the charts, but
as Jan
they
and Dean
weren't a top
or
10
Jan and
song.
Arnie?
No, it's Jan and Arnie.
Okay.
So officially, they put out three singles, and I guess there were flip sides on there, so they didn't even really have enough material to make a, in quotes, album.
Mm-hmm.
So they never had an album. They just had their 3 single 45s, and then Arnie bailed. So Baby Talk came out maybe a year and a half after Jenny Lee had been on the radio.
Okay.
So it was relatively close enough, and then those other records were in between. So it took us about 7 or 8 months to actually formulate some sort of new plan and put it into action.
Now, how did you?
And Baby Talk was a top 10 record, so I guess we did okay.
Now, at that point, had you hooked up with? A question I have, two questions. I know you obviously were doing Jan and Dean, and both you and Jan went to med school. Is that correct?
Jan went to med school, and I was in the School of Architecture.
Okay. Yeah. For some reason, I thought
I'm looking at my degree right now. It's on the wall. One of the coolest things. I have no idea how I got through that school. It was a hard school.
People used to say to me, "What are you going to?"
Wasn't as difficult as med school. I mean, med school was in a whole nother universe, but
do you know?
Still proud of it.
Do you know what kind of doctor or specialty Jan was working for in med school?
I don't know if he had picked out his specialty yet.
Mm-hmm.
So he did all his pre-med stuff at UCLA, and then he got into a med school. And I think he was in his maybe second semester when he had his automobile accident. And that ended that.
Now, here's a question. You folks hooked up with Brian Wilson, and he helped write some of the early. He was a writer, at least in some of the early songs, or.
Yeah, because again, we were pretty busy 5 days a week, being in college, so we didn't have and I don't think we were particularly good at writing songs from scratch, but we were pretty good with once a concept had been formulated by others, that we were good at adding in pieces, and then Jan became really a terrific music arranger. So he would write all the musical parts for the studio guys to play. So we were pretty involved. So we co-wrote a bunch of songs, and that's where Brian Wilson came into the picture, because Brian was a very prolific writer who was churning out a song every couple of days, and he couldn't possibly record them all. And there were songs that he did lose interest in, and since we were all friends, and Jan was teaching Brian all the tricks in the studio, so Brian, really was dependent upon Jan there in the beginning to teach him how to arrange and all that, and just all the technical stuff that one should know if they're in a recording studio. Now, most artists didn't really care; they just left it up to the studio engineer. But Jan was brighter than most all the people that we were working for. So he would ask those kind of questions, anything about everything from the microphones to, what kind of recording tape were you using and why, and blah, blah, blah. So he was very curious about all that kind of stuff.
Now,
and he was happy to pass that on to Brian.
Now, when you so obviously this was the Beach Boys were already taking flight by this point.
They had maybe it wasn't much of a flight.
Okay.
Let's put it that way. They had a couple of regional hits.
Okay.
Yeah, kind of warming up, and they got off the ground. Kind of like the Wright brothers, they got off the ground for a couple hundred yards. But they had a local hit, Southern California, and then kind of a regional hit that was okay, but no huge hit. So we had already had top 10 national, top 10 records by the time we met them. Mm-hmm. That we were already into our careers by almost 2 to 3 years. So we were established artists, and they were not. But right about the time we started working together, they came up with Surfing USA. So that was a huge breakthrough record for them.
Sure.
But we had Surf City out about the same time, and then Surf City was a number one record. I don't think Surfing USA was a number one record, but we got the very first number one surf record ever recorded.
Excellent.
So that was pretty cool. I'm sure most people would have thought that was the Beach Boys, that they must have the very first number one surf record, but that wasn't the case.
I was going to say we're here to set the record straight. Now in the studio.
Yeah, yes we are.
Did you?
Now Brian and Brian was a songwriter, obviously, one of the best ever.
Mm-hmm.
He'll probably go down in history as being one of the more important American songwriters of all time. But he, as I said, he was writing a lot of songs and writing great songs. So he, being a songwriter, the more people that recorded his stuff, he also had his own publishing company. So he was thrilled with having other artists record his music. So he didn't mind at all. I mean, he really enjoyed it, and especially if he had a song that he had lost interest in, but he had kind of the structure of it figured out. But then he would, like any artist, he would get involved in another project and then like that one better, and then he would go, okay, you guys can have this one or whatever you want. But getting a throwaway song from Brian Wilson was better than getting songs from other writers that were writing their A quality stuff.
Sure.
His stuff was even good if it was a throwaway. And then we put our own spin on it, and so our records were not exactly similar, which that was good too. So they weren't like mirror images of one another.
Sure. Now, did you double track?
Ours also our stuff always had a little sense of humor in it, which theirs didn't. So that was kind of part of our branding, was always a little tongue in cheek, if you know what I mean.
No, I hear you, and there's a certain a spirit and flavor that I always like. That sort of I always find very uplifting. Good.
Okay, yeah. No, we thought that's the way we thought of it. Was we were lucky to be living in Southern California and being involved in the Southern California beach culture and car culture was something we did and lived and enjoyed it. And so why not share it with the rest of the world? If the rest of the world was interested, we were more than happy to give them a glimpse of all of that.
Absolutely. Now, did you double track your harmonies? How much?
Oh gosh, all the time. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering how much of that was going on.
I think Dead Man's Curve. I once figured it out, and I don't know how I figured it out, but at the time when I remembered, I tried to write down every vocal part that I could remember that I did and that anybody else did. And a song on Dead Man's Curve, I remember it was over good 20 different vocal parts.
Wow. Uh-huh.
Well, even if it was double tracking, even if it was a vocal part doubling in unison, it still counted as a vocal part, and it was well over 20.
Wow. That's amazing.
So it was almost like a choir, and we liked choirs. We liked that big, fat harmony sound anyway, and we had always wanted to be in a vocal group with tons of voices anyhow. So here we were, although it was only 2 or 3 of us, 4 guys maybe making all those vocal parts. They were still fun to sing.
Now, how much tracking did you do with live bands, and how much was the backgrounds were already recorded before you did your vocal parts?
Believe it or not, we are just experimenting with that now, some 50 years later. We didn't do any, in those days, you didn't have the technology to be able to have, oh, you're saying like a click track where you could
No,
sing with it live?
no. I'm saying, all right, all right. Here we go. Where the band plays at the same time that the vocals are recorded, as opposed to you already have
No, 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 no. Yeah, no,
the
the
tracks are already recorded. The backing tracks are.
instrumental parts were all recorded. But you bring up a good point. Those first couple of doo-wop songs, we did totally the opposite from what everybody else was doing. We did the vocals first with a piano and maybe a metronome, and then we took it in the studio. I mean, we would do those at Jan's house, so we could take our time with them. And then we would take them into the studio, and the studio guys would wear earphones and listen to our track and try and play along with it.
Interesting.
And I say try and play along with it because our meter was not as precise as real studio musicians who have impeccable meter. And to them, we were all over the place. And we listened to it, and it sounded pretty close to being in the right meter, but not to them. But they'd make it work. They would laugh and chuckle about it. And soon thereafter, when we started double and triple tracking vocals and all that, that had to be done in a real studio. And then that's when he reverted to doing it the way everybody else did it, cut all the instrumental tracks first, and then come in and start laying down the vocals.
Now, were you there at the time that the instrumental backing tracks were recorded? And if so, who? I mean, I'm sure Hal Blaine was there. Are there other session musicians that you remember? Was Herb out? Did you?
All the same guy, all the
Wrecking Crew
guys that became the Wrecking Crew.
Okay.
Yeah. And a lot of those people were what evolved into, in quotes, the Wrecking Crew were the extra guys that Jan handpicked. People like Glenn Campbell. Glenn Campbell was not one of the regular Wrecking Crew guys. He was the new kid that showed up, and we heard him play and liked him and added him, into Hal's group. And then Leon Russell. We heard Leon play, and we added him in, and a guy named Larry Neckball, kind of the younger guys.
Sure.
But Hal's guys were kind of the old jazz guys that were kind of left over from the jazz days.
Mm-hmm.
And now the younger musicians were starting to show up, and those were the guys we were plucking out of other bands or stuff, and asked them to play on our stuff.
Well, that's great. I have a question for you. Where actually people have debated this? Where actually is Dead Man's Curve? There has been great debates. Yep.
We thought in terms of when we finally understood what we were doing. You by the formula, you would try and come up with certain themes that most of our fans at that age group could relate to.
Mm-hmm.
So we knew damn well with something like Dead Man's Curve that almost every major city or county or something would have their own Dead Man's Curve. Mm-hmm. We knew that generically there were probably Dead Man's Curves all over the place that we didn't know about. Mm-hmm. Now, we referred to, because we actually talked about the streets, we referred to what we knew as Dead Man's Curve, which was on Sunset just above UCLA. Mm-hmm. So there was a place where all of the people that, again, we knew and our high school knew as being Dead Man's Curve. So we loosely described it, even named a couple of streets that were close by, but we left it up to the music fans to kind of visualize maybe their own Dead Man's Curve.
Okay.
And that's like Surf City, too, as well. We didn't really specifically say where it was, but we kind of left it open-ended that it could be any place in Southern Cal, at the very least.
Now, after because I think my battery life is dying again. How did you get involved into the graphic, being a graphic artist and working on album covers and whatnot? How did that take flight for you?
Well, after Jan had his very, very devastating automobile accident where he did sustain brain damage, and he went from that, super high IQ, 170, 80 to 68. So he never was the same after that accident. So there were, I think it was at least 5 or 6 years, 7 years there that he was recovering. And during that time, I had graduated from USC, and my degree was in advertising design, which was packaging and all of and that kind of stuff. Anyway, it was all had to do with graphic arts and doing commercial things. It wasn't like being a fine artist painting something. So I that's what I got my degree in, and I figured, well, hell, that's why I was going to school. And most of my friends were in the music industry, and I knew how frustrated I was with having to deal with your record company and your record company's art department. And I always thought that the recording artist should be more involved in deciding how they wanted to be perceived, graphically and or even with the written word. So in my mind, all that should be controlled by the artist. The artist decides what their brand is to look like, and that the record company and the art department would execute that.
Sure.
When we were doing it, it was the other way around. The art department decided where you took your pictures and what the type read and where the type went. And I slowly, in our career, was trying to take over some of that stuff, and it was always a battle, and I got very, very little of it actually accomplished. But at least I was trying, and I was getting closer, and then Jan crashed, and I was no longer in the business. But then I wormed my way back into the business by having a graphic design company that specialized in music packaging. So that's the short answer.
Okay, sounds great. And you won a Grammy for the best album cover for a group called Pollution, or was that the name of the?
Yeah.
So
well, it was both. That was the name of the group and name of the I guess the album. I don't know. I thought it was pretty stupid, actually.
Did you have a favorite album cover that you did design that you're sort of most proud of?
Oh man, I got a few. I did at least 3 or 4 nitty-gritty dirt band covers that I really, really, really liked. A couple of Steve Martin covers that I did that I really enjoyed. Harry Nilsson's stuff, I did most all of his stuff. I did a couple of Beach Boy things that I liked. Some of the record companies were harder to deal with, and you didn't have as much freedom. but the ones that I had the most freedom with were the ones that came out the best.
Mm. Okay. Now, but before we we're coming around the curve. No pun intended. Tell me about the
Yeah, it's good fun though. I enjoy it.
tell me about the two things. Tell me about your current group, the Surf City All Stars, how that came to play, and I know you were working with Dave Lugman, who I know from the Tinseltown Rebellion album by Frank Zappa. That's where I knew some of Dave's drumming work.
All the way
Yeah,
back to the Zappa
yeah.
stuff, right? Those guys were the Jan and Dean, for the most part, the Jan and Dean backup band,
Mm-hmm.
which I formed. I worked with Papa Do Run Run for the first couple of years, and then once I pretty well had, I had all the pieces in place, I replaced them with real musicians.
Mm-hmm.
And those guys, I think 3 or 4 of them are still guys that I hired in the early 1980s. So they're just more or less the Jan and Dean backup band.
Okay.
And then once Jan was out of the pit, and Jan passed away.
Mm-hmm.
But we did more work. We did a lot more work, live work, the second time around than we did the first time around. We didn't have a whole lot of time first time around. Our first 7 years of we had maybe every other weekend, maybe summers where we could actually do concerts. But
Are you talking about the original era with Jan and Dean?
Yeah, the
Okay.
original era.
Yep.
Phase 1,
Mm-hmm.
as we called it. And then there was, I think, at least 9 to 10 years before when Jan was recovering that we didn't do anything. And then the movie came out, the TV movie came out, which really helped. And that's when we started getting all sorts of offers, and we played for another 20 plus years after that.
Mm.
And played in 10 times, 20 times as many venues as we, again, did the first time around.
Now, what do you remember about? I got to get this in. What do you remember about hosting the TAMI Show?
Oh, only that it was kind of like Woodstock.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never been involved with that many artists from that many different musical backgrounds and genres. I thought, we were intrigued by it.
Mm-hmm.
The business model wasn't so hot. I mean, we did question whether or not they would actually. This was done for music in theaters, and I kind of sensed that the movie makers weren't going to be all that interested in some sort of music, and certainly people who own the theaters didn't really know how to market going after teenagers. So, in theory, the thing did not work like it was supposed to work, and it was years and years and years before it ever, made it around to being shown a few times, maybe on cable.
Sure.
And then Dick Clark got a hold of it, and Dick Clark rewrote all of the contracts, so all the artists would get repaid with the new structures and new money. And then he digitally cleaned it all up, and the music and the film, and did a hell of a great job. So it ended up being a very, very important piece of film, like an iconic piece of film. So I'm thrilled to be a major part of that.
Absolutely. Do you remember meeting James Brown for the first time?
Yeah, well, we knew James before. We knew what was going to happen.
Okay.
I guess nobody else did, but we had worked with James on and off for a good couple of years before he showed up in the TAMI Show, and we may have even recommended him because the producers were really more movie people than they were music people.
Mm-hmm.
And so they relied on kind of our instincts of who to put together.
Sure.
I mean, some were obvious. You know, they were going to do Motown, they were going to do the English Invasion guys, and then a few middle of the road artists. So they wanted to cover all genres, and they pretty well did it. I think they did a hell of a great job.
So
it was a neat piece of film. I loved it.
Oh, I'm a big fan. So you had done gigs with James, or been on the bill with him, or?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we did not a bunch, but pretty many of those shows back. We didn't do the Apollo, but a lot of those kinds of theaters on the East Coast where they would mix all the rock people together, at least 2 or 3 acts. They wouldn't do 15 acts, but
sure.
So we had played with him in state fairs. We played a lot of fairs. He did the fair circuit too as well. So we were either playing on the same stage or crossing paths.
Okay, that's great. Do you remember any theaters you did up in Boston by title?
Boston?
In Boston, yeah. Do you remember any theaters you guys were playing up in maybe like the North Shore or like the Framingham Carousel Theater? Or
I'm looking at a poster right here. Wednesday Dance, August 14. Had to be 63-ish. In-person Jan Dean, the Surf City Boys, plus the Continentals, don't remember them, and Arnie Woo Woo Ginsburg.
Does it mention the venue?
Who was in WMEX,
sure,
which
yep.
was the big rock station.
Yep.
Admission, $1. York Beach Casino, wherever the hell that was.
In Maine. That's in Maine. York Beach.
In Maine, yeah. Well, I knew it was in Maine, but I don't remember where York Beach was. But it was close to Maine. It was out of town a bit. But admission, $1.
Wow, that's you're really milking
That's
the fans
amazing.
then.
Yeah, I know. Well, that was Arnie Woo Woo.
And
So we did a lot of stuff for Arnie.
Yeah, he was definitely a.
I played in a. I played in a. I think it was a fundraiser, a basketball game where it was the disc jockeys and musicians against the Boston Patriots.
Wow.
A basketball game.
I hope your basketball.
And it turned into a football game because we didn't like it. You know, we were bored of playing basketball, and it would always turn into a football game where they hike the ball and kind of do. It was really fun. They were good guys, and nobody got hurt or anything, but it was a lot of fun. The audiences seemed to love it. And they would fly me from L.A. all the way back there to play in these games. I loved them. I maybe did 2 or 3 of them.
Fascinating. Okay, two final questions here before you let you go. And we know that there's many folks who should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that are not. We know that it should change its name, in my opinion, to the Popular Music Hall of Fame, when certain people who are about as far away from rock and roll as possible have made it in there.
No kidding.
I want to know your personal opinion, if you'd care to share with us, on the Rock and Roll Hall of Shame. Yep.
Yeah, that's what it is. I just don't even think about it because it's too abstract to even think about. It doesn't make any sense to me. I'm kind of a metrics kind of guy, and you know, there are numbers. The other Hall of Fames, football and basketball and baseball, all have numbers.
Sure.
I mean, the numbers don't lie. In this thing, I have no idea what their criteria is. And they kept telling me, well, you know, it has something to do with pioneering. Well, if we weren't pioneers making records in Jan's garage and getting top 10 records out of a garage, I don't know what pioneering is, but that's okay. I don't get it. I was when it first started, and Dick Clark wasn't in it the first year. I knew it was a sham, and it took 3 years, and for him to get in 3 or 4, and he was so gracious. You know, he didn't like say about time. Lou Adler, our kind of our manager and co-producer, I guess was one of his titles, executive producer on a lot of our records. Lou Adler went on and, you know, started a record company, and he got Grammys and all sorts of stuff. He made it into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame maybe 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this was 30 years later.
Sure.
But again, he was gracious enough, and he called me up and invited me. He wanted me to sit at his table, and I was very honored at the ceremony. And in that conversation where he invited me, he said, "Well, you know, actually," he said, "This is really funny. This would be Lou, and he cared about as much as I care about it. Mm-hmm. He didn't really care, but it was nice." And he said in the conversation when he invited me, "You know, actually, I already thought I was in. I thought I remembered already being in it." And I said, "No, Lou, you weren't. This is it. You know, this is they finally got around to you." "Oh, okay." And I went. I watched the inductees, and half of them I wouldn't even stand up for because I never even heard of them. So moved on. So.
And final question before we let you go: Have you ever heard the Frank Zappa surf tune called "Let Me Take You to the Beach"?
No, but I think Logan told me about it, and if it did, he may have played it for me a long time ago. I was a Zappa fan.
Okay,
I really appreciated it. Anybody that did you know, lampooning and stuff, I was all in for that. As long as there was some satire in there, and again, tongue-in-cheek, I loved it. And of course, my friends Flo and Eddie were involved in some of that stuff too. So I was really tight with those guys, and if they were a part of it, I knew I would love it.
Now, did you have any titles that you could mention that were some of your favorite Frank tunes?
Did he do Reuben and the Jets? Was that
the Reuben and the Jets album. Absolutely, yep.
I loved the whole album.
Okay.
I mean, there were some that I kind of remember the titles, but I love the whole concept of the whole damn thing. And I think in there somewhere somebody was saying about Reuben or something, and he was the main guy in the group.
Yeah, they're you know, they always say this is their.
They always said the main guy because in the 50s when chicks would always say, "Well, he's the main guy in the group." You know, that'd be the lead singer. You like Dion and you know, the guys like that. Yeah, they had the background singers, you know, the Belmonts, but the main guy was always the cool guy with the neatest pompadour. So the main guy. So I used that actually on a business card just a couple of 3 or 4 weeks ago. I did redesign some business cards, and under my name it says "one of the main guys." So a little twist on Frank. So I gave him a little credit for coming up with that. One of the main guys in the group, Freddie or Reuben. I liked it all.
Fantastic. All right.
My wife is calling me.
Yeah. No, we
got this 5 o'clock.
Oh yeah. No, I'm gonna
dinner that I gotta go.
Yeah, I'm gonna let you go here. It was a real honor to speak with you, and I hope to meet
also, hey, if you find you need some more or there's something you forgot to ask, you know, we can do more. I don't care.
I really appreciate that, but I'm going to let you go here, and I'm going to say hopefully the next time I'm down in L.A. I can come and say hello for a hot minute. And thank you for your time talking with the Mighty Slim here, and it's a real honor and privilege to talk to the one and only Dean Torrence. Thank you again, Dean.
Thank you, Slim. And I'm checking out the Blade. Just checking out.
All right. We'll see you when the future gets here. Thanks again. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, Slim.
All right.